I'm grateful again for your presence on Wednesday nights, and I'm grateful even more so that the snow didn't decide to come another day late. It is good to have you here for the second to the last in this sort of strange series. We finish that piece next Wednesday when I invite your presence again, and we'll discover that it may not be necessary to have a finely defined idea about hell in order to be a good follower of Jesus. The world could end tonight or tomorrow. It really could. We could get hit by a giant meteor. There could be a solar storm that wiped us out. I suppose, according to the theology of some God, could just decide we've been here long enough, bring it all to a close. Not likely, but possibly. I'm not much interested in that. But if it happened, what difference would it make in your life? Now, you could be smart and say, well, I wouldn't have to worry about that because I wouldn't be thinking about it anymore. If you knew, what difference would it make in your life? Preachers for eons have been somewhat fascinated by the end, or Armageddon, a word for allegedly the last great battle located someplace south of Jerusalem. A battle, by the way, that no one was involved in but God. Or about the apocalypse, maybe you've heard about the four horsemen, or about the rapture, which is a shorthand way of saying at some point, according to some poor biblical interpretation, some of us disappear. I looked up the end on my computer, or words to that effect, and got long lists of stuff. One was supposed to be a visualization of this rapture, the end of all times, when the good folks go up and the bad folks go down. It was a picture of a rally of some sort in some kind of gymnasium with a young man up front preaching and a lot of young people sitting in chairs. And all of a sudden there is lightning and thunder and lights flashing, and people start going through the roof. I don't think that's going to happen. But I do want to know why some people think it's going to happen. Whole denominations have been built on these predictions. Playing with dates and alleged times have been going on for much of the life of the church, where somehow odd dates and semi-descriptions have been offered as a roadmap to the end. It's even created in its wake whole denominations. Our brothers and sisters in the journey, the Jehovah's Witnesses, have been a leading denomination in this whole business, founded by some people late 1800 and early 1900s, who sort of figured out that good parts of Scripture had dates mysteriously hidden by symbols and descriptions in them, and from those we could garner when the end would come and thus prepare for it. The Jehovah's Witness denomination has, in its history, or over its history, the quickest growth pattern and the steepest declines of any denomination in the country. And there are, of course, reasons for that. One is that they are eager and often in their evangelism, and they put us to shame as they go door to door. And you probably met them at your door at least sometime or another in your life. Part of that, of course, has been predictions, as people worry about the end. The problem, of course, is that they've made 3 definite predictions over the history of their denomination, and the week after, membership decline is at least as fast as membership growth. of the previous times. The world was supposed to end in 1914, but as you probably realize, 1915 showed up. It was supposed to end in 1975. We're not talking about signs of the times here. We're talking about figuring out descriptive phrases and numbers in the Old Testament. There have been other groups as well. I've often wondered why people have thought the Bible is hidden and hidden with meanings, when it would assume that something about a God who reveals himself in Jesus Christ would like to make it as absolutely clear as possible, so that salvation doesn't become a game of hide and seek. There are other reasons, of course, for playing the game of end times. That makes it easy for us to figure out ways to tell who's making it and who isn't. And far too often the Christian church has enjoyed that discussion. A long time ago, someplace around 1970 or 71, I was still a student at Concordia, and a speaker was invited to the campus, not by the college, but by a group inside the college. And his name was Hal Lindsey. Have any of you ever heard that name before? Some. He wrote a book that sold well over 1 million copies called The Late Great Planet Earth. And he made a whole lot of money going around the country speaking. Hal had been one of those who figure out dates and times from events and writings in the Old Testament. People listened. Even the 4 philosophy students who were very cynical and sat in the back row. Sometime during that talk, the 3 of us decided to meet afterwards, and we did, and we made a pact. Part of Mr. Lindsay's talk had been the statement that he had been told that he would not die until the second coming of Christ. In our cynical natures as college seniors, we made a pact that the 4 of us would meet at his funeral. I'm not sure that's Christian. By the way, Hal's still alive. I think he's in his 90s. And unfortunately, I've forgotten who the 3 guys were, so it's not going to work anyway. What is so important about wanting to know the end time? For some, I'm sure it's mere curiosity. For others, I think it's a kind of a one-upness. We know and you don't. A third reason might be if you can convince people that the end is coming and it's all going up in a ball of fire. Fear is the ultimate control agent of the human race. Trying to make a religion one of figuring it out seems to me somewhat contradictory to the faith. There is a long-running half-hour program on cheap stations late on Sunday night. It has been around almost as long as I've been ordained, maybe longer, I'm not sure. And the speaker is a man named Jack Van Imp, or Empey, depending on if you pronounce the E on the end. How many of you have heard that name? Yeah, some of you have. He's been doing it for absolute endlessly. He and Drizella, who is his wife and MC, have been telling people for years that the end is right around the corner. Must be a huge corner. One day, about a year ago, as I was going through parts of Good Shepherd's library, which I do every once in a while, I found a DVD that had been brought in or deposited there for insertion in our collection. It was of Jack giving another one of his prophecies. And the title of it was something like, "Could 2012 be the end?" Well, how's that working out for you, Jack? He's not the only one. In these people who take their Bibles very seriously, one could argue perhaps too seriously sometimes, it's remarkable because those who I've just mentioned probably know their Bibles better than I do. It's remarkable the texts, the words that aren't used. Sometimes we can tell more about a preacher by what he or she doesn't say. This old Bible of mine has Jesus' words in the red print. Matthew 24:36. But about that day and hour no one knows, neither angels in heaven nor the Son, but only the Father. From Matthew, who actually got the story from Mark, so it's going to sound very similar. Again in red type. But about that day or hour no one knows, neither the angels in heaven nor the Son, but only the Father. Be aware, keep alert, for you don't know when the time will come. And then, later on in the history of the Christian church, in the book of Acts, Luke writes these words of Jesus as he is about to leave his disciples. Jesus replied, well, let me back up a verse. So when they had come together, they asked him, Lord, is this the time when you will restore the kingdom to Israel? And Jesus replied, it is not for you to know the times or seasons that the Father has set by his own authority, but you will receive power when the Spirit comes, and you will be my witnesses in Jerusalem, Judea, and Samaria, and to the ends of the earth. The pattern continues of asking, are we ready? One of the best-selling series in history comes about because of this, called the Left Behind series, which was big in this country and some others, presuming to understand in novel form how the end would come. I only could stomach one of those books, not because the writing was poor, but because the theology was so tragic. In one of those books, there was a story about an airplane flying with a Christian captain and an unchristian populace behind him. And the rapture happened. The rapture means those who love Jesus are taken up into the clouds, wherever up is. If you notice that the language is difficult from the Bible, since I love to ask confirmation kids which direction is up. Can't do that anymore because the old up and the new up isn't the same thing. So the captain is the Christian, right? And he disappears from the plane, which is flying at a relatively high altitude. And his clothes are left neatly folded on his seat, much to the chagrin of the co-pilot. The plane goes down, of course, because there ain't nobody at the controls. So what we have is a story about God picking his favorite and 165 people dying. That's a story that didn't happen. I would have questions about a God like that. Apparently that didn't occur to the authors of the series. It is not an easy thing. There are no dates. But all of that matters little to me. My question is, what difference would it make if we knew? We got all these people warning us about dates and times. What difference would it make if we knew so that we could be ready? Would we shape up? Is the purpose to scare us out of somehow not going to hell? Shouldn't we wait and be ready? What difference would it make if you knew Jesus was coming tomorrow? I asked that question long ago in a Bible study in the book of Revelation of a mixed group of people in a former parish, and they all sat there as quiet as you are until a delightful female voice from the back row said, I'd clean my house. Well, I suspect that most of us think more closely to that than we would immediately realize. We would somehow try to get our house in order, our lives straightened out to look good for Jesus. Shouldn't that be the way we operate? Why should it make any difference? Who cares? What's the import of knowing the date? The promise is sure. The fear is tragic. The readiness is up to you and I and the Spirit for His coming. But it isn't the point to get us ready, because His coming, as well as His gift of salvation, is for real. I've never figured out why Christians have ever been encouraged or ever been willing to be afraid. After all, God's on our side. The gentlest way I have heard that put was by a sermon by an elderly pastor, Alvin Rogness. Most of you wouldn't know that name. For years, he wrote the backs of bulletins that came out from Augsburg Publishing House. He was president of Luther Seminary for 20, 30 years, retiring just in time for my class to only have him once. Maybe that's why Al decided to leave. I don't know, but he and his wife, Nora, of many years, had driven to Fargo on a weekend. He was invited to preach at Pontoppidan Lutheran Church, a little ELCA church down by the Red River on the Fargo side. It was homecoming at Concordia, and though neither were graduates there, they had decided to make the trip. Al invited to preach, and they liked music. I made sure that I didn't have to work that Sunday so I could hear him preach at least one more time. And he preached about an eschatological text, one that had to do with the end times. I wish I could imitate his gentleness. He talked about that fact. He talked about the fact that he and Nora had talked about the end for each of them and made preparation. He had talked about he was eager to discover what he could not know as a mortal. He talked about the gentleness of God in inviting us all to the banquet. He talked about all kinds of good old stuff and how he was eager to meet his God. And then he got the old gentle smile that I had seen years before. And he said, but, that got the attention of the congregation. But he said, you know, Nora and I drove all the way from Minneapolis for today. And it's been nice to be with you. But we really came for the choir. And if it's all the same to God, we wish He'd wait till after this afternoon. I like that line. Absolute confidence, absolute honesty. There are other good things for you and I to see and hear and be. And sometime, maybe in your future or mine, but sometime in God's future, there will be just one more surprise.